Fall of the Western Roman Empire. Rome was an empire that started as a city-state in Italy, but grew, and at its peak controlled all of the Mediterranean Sea, North Africa, parts of modern England and Egypt. They conquered till 27 BCE, and when they stopped conquering, they entered a time of peace called the Pax Romana. There was political stability with a better trained and more controlled bureaucracy. Armies stopped invasions, and there were public works built, such as roads and colosseums. There was also economic integration, such as the common Roman coinage, established trade routes, and areas focusing on certain products. There were also more and larger cities emerging. They established administrative centers and military camps all over the empire. Rome flourished in this time of peace until the lack of conquering forced many economic trends to come to fruition. This caused Rome to spiral into economic and political chaos in the 3rd century. When Rome wasn't conquering, they made a lot less money. That, when coupled with depopulation, led to the economy being weakened.
Diocletian and Constantine set many reforms that kept Rome afloat in the short term, like splitting the empire into 2 halves, but in the long term contributed to Rome's fall. The Western Roman Empire was weaker than the East, because the East controlled most of the trade routes. Without the funding that the East had, the West was incapable of maintaining their army, and the Germanic tribes carved out parts of the Roman Empire. Until the last emperor, Romulus Augustus, was kicked off the throne and a replacement was never installed. Soon after, the Western Roman Empire became decentralized and finally fell. There are multiple reasons why the Western Roman Empire fell. We will discuss them in this video. The internal issues such as administrative problems, lagging economics, depopulation, and military issues led to external pressures of the Germanic tribesmen being able to infiltrate Rome.
The administrative problems the Roman Empire faced played a large role in its fall. Diocletian set a few major reforms that helped stabilize Rome temporarily. One of his reforms reorganized the administration of the empire by creating a tetrarchy. He split the empire into an eastern half and a western half, since such a large empire could not be ruled over by one man. This eventually led to separate states forming. Instead of seeing each other as allies and ruling the same empire, the co-emperors started to see each other as opponents, causing civil wars that weakened their armies. They each collected their own taxes, and the East got wealthier, and eventually became reluctant to help the West. When the West was attacked by Germanic tribes, the East, who already saw themselves as separate states, didn't think it was worth it to help defend the West at the risk of losing themselves. Because the East no longer provided any military support to aid in fending
Rome also faced the problem of a weaker central government and stronger large landowners and generals who ruled and acted for their own benefit rather than Rome's. These officials would buy imperial favor and in return received immunity from regular taxes. These large landowners then in turn granted protection from these taxes to smaller landowners. Smaller landowners gave their land to the large landowners, protecting the smaller farmers from imperial taxes, while still allowing them to work on the land themselves. The owners of the large estates would then charge the smaller landowners a rent which they kept for themselves. This benefited the large landowners at the expense of the Roman government.
The spread of serfdom also contributed to weakening the core of the government. While slavery was declining, tenant farming was growing. Landowners began to hand out portions of their land to poor tenant farmers, and in return, they would get a certain amount of labor annually. Originally, these tenant farmers were free men who had contracts with these landowners. At the same time, Rome was handing out fields that needed to be restored to Germans conquered in war. The lines between the free Romans and the unfree Germans began to blur. The status of the free Roman tenant farmer declined. It became part of an imperial policy for tenant farmers to support the landowner in any way to make sure the fields produced enough to meet the taxes the government demanded of the landlords. They became more and more attached to the landowners. If they fled, they could be chained and brought back like slaves. This manorial system took power away from the central authority and gave it to the landowners. As a result, it weakened the core's power to defend and expedited the fall of the West.
Paying soldiers and government officials took money, and when Rome ran out, they were forced to mint more coins to pay soldiers' salaries. Unlike modern currency, Roman money was made with materials that were scarce. To make more money, the government made coins with less silver and debased their currency to the point that it was worth almost nothing. The debasing, coupled with the minting of many coins, made inflation run rampant and caused staples to be much more expensive. Soldiers then demanded more money because staples were expensive. To pay for the soldiers, Rome had to debase their currency even farther, and the cycle continued. While inflation hurt the people in the city who relied on money and trade to acquire goods, The farmers who could still easily trade goods and services were still hurt by increased taxes, but not affected to the same extent as people in the cities. The lack of stable currency greatly disrupted trade within the empire. Many sections had become experts at producing goods like olives and metals. The lack of a stable currency meant that trading was done through bartering and caused trade to slow down almost universally. The constant need for money, brought on by the lack of conquering, led to inflation and a slowdown of trade. This caused a cycle which caused economic chaos across Rome.
The Roman populace was greatly reduced during the Pax Romana. This fall in Rome's population caused a decrease in their agricultural productivity and less tax revenue for the Roman government. Higher prices, along with increased taxes, forced many into poverty. Poverty discouraged people from having children, which created a cycle that shrank the population more and more.
The small number of people that were left also affected military strength. There were not many people willing to join the army. Due to the difficulty in recruiting people for the new military, the Romans were forced to recruit Germanic tribesmen. The larger army also meant that taxes were heavily enforced on the people, which caused financial struggle. Although the Germanic tribesmen in the army were very strong and warlike, they lacked the intense training and discipline of the previous Roman army that had been the main cause of Rome's prior success. Eventually, Rome relied heavily on the Germanic tribesmen, and more of the army was barbarized. The Germanic tribesmen disobeyed the commands of Romans, and Rome eventually lost control over the military. Without a stable army, it was more vulnerable to outside attacks. Although many tend to believe that conquest was how barbarians destroyed the Western Roman Empire, it was infiltration. In some occasions, the Romans would freely let in Germanic tribesmen into the empire. For example, the Visigoths had been allowed into the empire in 376. In other cases, the tribesmen would just force their way into the empire when the Roman army was at its weakest. This was how tribes like the Angles, Saxons, Jutes, and Alans entered and ruthlessly pillaged the frontiers. The end of the Western Roman Empire started in 376, when the Visigoths arrived. These Visigoths had been escaping a more ferocious group, the Huns. When they felt that, as refugees under the care of the Romans, they were not treated properly, they began to destroy the military. As more and more tribes forcefully entered the empire would get weaker. This caused even more tribes to enter. They wrecked the empire's economy and lowered the tax base. The Visigoths who had started this destruction were successful in putting an end to the Western Roman Empire. Vandals and other groups seized Spain and North Africa. The internal problems of Rome allowed these Germanic invasions to occur.
Rome's fall was not a one-of-a-kind event. The same trends can be seen in many other empires. Rome's weakening central power and the strengthening of other people who control resources is a common factor in the fall of empires. This can be seen in Rome through the rising power of large landowners and generals. Farmers joining large landowners and armies loyal to generals above all else is very dangerous. In Persia, officials controlling a lot of land grew strong, and the central government grew weaker, which made them harder to control. Han China and Rome faced many battles of succession. Roman armies put many of their own generals on the throne when they felt like they were underpaid or mistreated, which resulted in civil wars. The problems of people in the periphery gaining power, economic issues, and battles for succession were common and can be seen in other empires that have fallen.